BBC Radio Oxford, a very good afternoon now. We all have a good conspiracy, don't we? Nothing like being engaged by a mystery thriller on a cold, long, dark winter's night. The Sword of Moses is being described as Oxford's answer to the Da Vinci Code, in fact, for the thinking person. And its author, Dr. Dominic Selwood, joins me in the studio right now. Lovely to see you. Afternoon.
Good afternoon, Kat. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, my first observation, you've come armed with your book. That's a very big book.
It is pretty sizable. But, I think that big books are coming back again. There's been a long while now when the bookshops haven't been stocking larger titles. Things like short stories, things like poetry, things like longer books have been out of favour. But we think they're coming back again.
I think if it's a good book and you get gripped by it, you don't want it to end anyway, really. So, I don't think that anyone would be fazed by the size of the book. But let's just talk about, before we do talk about the book and the fact that, Oxford plays such a central role within that particular novel. Many strings to your bow, Dominic. The list reads author, historian, lecturer, barrister. Is that the sort of correct order of preference?
Yes, I think that's how I'd like to see it. Yeah.
I'm glad I've got it right. So author first and foremost. So where did your love of books? I mean, everything sort of centres around books. I mean, your law, your history, and everything sort of, as I say, nucleus. The book is at the nucleus of all those things. But where did all of it start? Did your parents used to read to you?
Yes, they certainly did. And I'm the youngest of four children, and I was never the sporty one. I was always the one who spent more time at home doing other things. So I was always surrounded by books. Books were always my favourite hobby, and for as long as I can remember.
So what was the first book, if you cast your mind back then to when you were little Dominic, and the first book that you read that sort of really kind of engaged you and got you by the jugular and you were inspired by? Do you remember that book?
I think the first books that I can really remember seriously, and it shows my age, it takes me back to the 70s, but I was one of that generation of real Enid Blyton adventure stories. And I was hooked. I mean, I liked, as you were saying, about longer stories that you can really get into, something that opens up a universe. And by the time you've gone beyond the Chronicles of Narnia or something into slightly more older books, I think the Famous Five and the Secret Seven were the first things I can really remember getting excited about and having them lined up on my shelf.
And those books, took you, which many books should. They take you to a different world, a different place, on an adventure, which is exactly what Enid Blyton used to do with me. I just remember standing and talking to my grandma. She was doing the washing up in her kitchen. I was staying with her in her flat. And I was reading, I can't remember which particular Enid Blyton book it was, but... And I was telling her the story because I was so gripped by it, but I wanted to share it. I wanted to share it with my grandma while she was doing the washing up. But that's right, they do. Books do just grab you, don't they? They do engage you. And you've made, I suppose, a life out of... I mean, you must have spent your life studying for a start.
Well, reading, I mean, all reading is learning in one way or another.
And you love imparting your knowledge on other people, of course, with your lecturing.
Lecturing as well. I mean, lecturing is a great thing to be able to do, to have the opportunity to do it. One's very lucky. But to be able to convey enthusiasm for your subject, it's a great opportunity and a privilege to be given. So
let's talk about your fascination. We talked about your fascination with books, but what about your fascination then with history and the medieval stuff?
Some of my earliest memories are from Cyprus, where I grew up. And back then, in Cyprus, just after the war in the 70s, it was a very different place to what it is now. And I just remember childhood surrounded by ancient pagan temples, early Christian ruins, crusader castles. So it's a really rich historical place. And there was plenty of time for just wandering around and spending time in those places, thinking about it, populating it in your mind with people, imagining what it was like. And I was hooked from then.
So it all started there.
Yeah.
It all just had it's amazing what, the impact that your childhood and all those things around you within your childhood actually does have on your later life. It is all so utterly relevant. Now, you trained at Oxford as well, because you came back to Oxford as a graduate.
That's right, yes. As an undergraduate, I was in Wales, which was great, watching rugby, drinking beer, studying there. But then I decide that I really wanted to do history. I had been studying law. And the one place where you can really have access to these amazing historical resources is here. It's the most phenomenal library. And in fact, there are quite a few scenes in the book set in and around Oxford, in the libraries, in that world. Some of them fairly gruesome, maybe what was going on in my imagination when I was trying to do some of the work. But it was an amazing privilege to be able to come and do that with those resources here.
So really, you've got a lot to thank in terms of Oxford, because I would imagine most of the inspiration, a lot of the inspiration, came from training, from being in this historical city with so much rich history.
I mean, you do start to, with anyone, when you get immersed in it, you start to see that and nothing else. I remember I'd found this wonderful manuscript in the library in the Bodleian on a Friday afternoon, and I was going away from Oxford for the weekend, and I came back again, and as I was driving past the Bodleian, I saw it was on fire. There were fire engines, and there was water going all over it. I thought, oh my God!
The manuscript.
And I stopped the car and jumped out, and all I could think was, the manuscript! And I asked someone, what's happened, what? And they said, oh, it's right, they're just shooting a scene for a film.
Oh. I was wondering. I just thought, no, I'm sure the Bodleian didn't catch fire. I didn't know about this, but you had me gripped, and,
right.
and yeah, absolutely, I fell for it. My guest this afternoon is Dr. Dominic Selwood, and we're going to talk more about the new novel, The Sword of Moses. It's being described, I think, which is a wonderful endorsement of this book, the thinking man's Da Vinci Code. So we'll talk about that, and indeed, the fact that Oxford centres, it plays a sort of a central character within the novel. After this, from Captain and Tennille, this is Do That To Me One More Time. It's BBC Radio Oxford. Now, my guest in the studio this afternoon is author. Well, he's many things. He's got many hats, in fact. He's author, historian, lecturer and barrister, in that order of preference. Dr. Dominic Selwood, and we're talking about his latest novel, The Sword of Moses. Now, it's been compared, which I think is quite an endorsement, really, of your book, actually, The Thinking Man's Da Vinci Code. Do you quite like those sort of comparisons?
Well, it's very flattering. I mean, it's something, and probably entirely unjustified, but it's something that people can
very humble.
can understand. I mean, I think it's if I had to describe it, I'd say it's a cross between Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Da Vinci Code, Lara Croft, and The Name of the Rose.
Oh wow!
It's got elements of those in it.
You had me at hello. But I think, if you're comparing it to all of those things, a cross between all of those sort of things, you're going to have a lot of people queuing up to buy that book. In fact, but did you read the Da Vinci Code?
I did read the Da Vinci Code. Yes, I read it pretty much as soon as it came out, and I think we have a lot to be very grateful to Dan Brown for, in that he's introduced ideas to a very wide reading public, that are ideas that fascinate me and that now fascinate an increasing number of people. So like the Templars, for example, he mentions the Templars. They're my special area of study. I've studied them for over 20 years. And when I started, you were a bit of a loony if you talked about Templars. But now you can barely turn on a computer game or go into a bookshop and not see a couple of books about the Templars. It
is a fascinating area of history, absolutely. So in terms of Dan Brown's factual, historical facts, did he get it all right?
I thought you'd ask me that. Look, I think he did a very good job with a lot of things. It's true, and I think...
Did he get it right?
I think he's acknowledged that it's entertainment. There's a certain amount of liberties taken.
Yeah. So one thing, or certainly the difference between the Da Vinci Code and your book, The Sword of Moses, is the fact that everything, you're a historian, so everything in that book is factually correct, but it is put over in an entertaining way.
I really hope so. You can't tell an adventure story, which is entertainment and escapism, without having facts around which to pin them and base it. And I just really tried to make an effort to get those facts right, so that by the time people have finished the book and they've enjoyed it, and they've had, hopefully, a good, entertaining read, and it's been an exciting read, at the same time they've come away with something beyond the story. There's been a basis of fact that they've also absorbed. I think that's a very exciting idea.
So what will a reader experience when they are reading the book?
They will be taken to a number of very historic places, Oxford, which we'll talk about, but also the Middle East. I've just come back from living in the Middle East, and it's a fascinating time there currently, because a lot of the things that are shaping the way the world is going to look in the next 50 to 100 years are happening in the Middle East. So my lead character, Dr. Ava Curzon, she is in charge of getting back all the looted artifacts for the Baghdad Museum, which all got looted after the 2003 war. And so she's living there as a European in the Middle East. She's an Arabist. She's learned Arabic. She's studied at Oxford, Harvard, Cairo. And so that idea of a European who has a kind of a slightly wider view and incorporates the Middle East, I think is something that, it's very interesting for us to look at the moment. There's a real relevance for that.
Now, your heroine was an Oxford graduate. I mean, why does Oxford take such centre stage? We mentioned the Bodleian as well, because that again is quite crucial to the storyline. there are bits in the story that the Bodleian certainly plays a very important role in.
No, there are some very important areas, and one I'm not going to give a spoiler, but some very grisly things happening in the library. And firstly, it's a dramatic and a super setting for it. But I think possibly more importantly, the fundamental idea of the book is that there's a group of very nasty people who are trying to get hold of some ancient biblical artifacts. The Ark of the Covenant is one of them, and also some ancient texts. So if you're talking texts, you have to be talking libraries. And if you're talking libraries, then, Oxford has, and is lucky enough to have, one of the most amazing libraries on the planet.
Where else in Oxford do you mention in the book?
The Botanic Gardens feature. There's some things happening in the Botanic Gardens. And there are also some scenes set inside one of the colleges.
Oh, you're not giving anything else away, though. How long has this book been in your head?
Probably for 20 years, from when I started studying the Templars here in Oxford. And when I'd finished that, I wrote a textbook on the Templars, which is a serious book on the history of the real order. But from just spending time talking to people about what I was doing, you talk to other people, graduate students who are studying things, and it might be cooling ratios of superconductors or Japanese wind instruments or teeth painting in Dagestan, or
over my head.
Everybody seemed fascinated by the Templars, and I suddenly thought this is a marvellous vehicle for adventure stories.
So why is it taking you so long to write it then? It's been in your head for 20 years, but so why now? Why so long?
Well, I think all the research has come together. It takes a long time to pull it together. And there are many other strands in there as well. Obviously, there's the whole archaeology piece, and living in the Middle East helped to bring that element into focus for me. There's a lot of crime. Clearly, bad people do bad things.
How do you research that, then? How do you research, how to do a crime, or, things like that? How do you, it clearly fascinates you.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to have been a criminal barrister for 5 years. So I have a lot of experience of the way these things work, the way things are committed, investigated, how trials work, the details of evidence that maybe you don't necessarily see on the television. So that all helps a very great deal in putting together these kind of scenarios.
You're the perfect author, really, aren't you?
Well, I don't know. I had a lot of fun doing it.
So when's it out?
It came out yesterday. It's now available on bookshops, Amazon, online. The Kindle will be coming out this week.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like a fabulous book, and good luck with that as well. Have you got something else waiting in the wings, another book in your head?
Well, Dr. Ava Curzon has been such a great person to get to know. She's I was too busy working in Oxford to get to know many girls. I think she's the Oxford girl that I wanted to meet, so definitely the next adventure is on the way.
Your perfect woman that came from Oxford. Wonderful. What about a film, actually, quickly, because Da Vinci Code we mentioned, that was made into a film. Tom Hanks, I think, was in Da Vinci Code. What about this? Is that maybe something that has been mentioned, suggested to you, that this could be a film?
A number of people have brought it up. I think I would, wouldn't I? I think it would make a great film. It's certainly got all the action that you would need.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Dominic Selwood, it's been lovely to meet you. Thank you very much for coming in this afternoon.